Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I missed you all last week.
And we miss not having you with us.
Well, it's good to be here this morning and to be able to chat with you, Sue. And hopefully, we'll have some meaningful conversation this morning.
And maybe inspire each other.
Yes, and lift each other up.
That's right, because that's what we need to do. And because we will continue our conversation about women in the Bible and women of importance. And really, one of the most important things that as women we can do is to lift each other up. Not just when things are going good, but when in the bad times as well.
And when we lift each other up, we're lifting up others as well, and maybe setting an example of giving someone else courage to stand up. And you don't know what you might be inspiring someone else to if they see you stand up.
Yep, we never know. Yesterday, we missed Pastor Lydia at worship, but she was home with Scott, who was positive for COVID again. And I thought he must be very miserable. But we all pulled together and lifted each other up. And it was a very enjoyable, uplifting service. I want to especially highlight Chris Nunn and his friend Alex, who played the clarinet. Oh my goodness.
It was wonderful. What a lovely experience. The Ave Maria is one of my favorites. And he played it with such feeling. It felt like a prayer, which of course it is.
Yeah. That both of them were just beautiful.
Yes.
And Trisha's story about her sewing and the mission, that is just amazing. I have some friends that here in Independence that sew bears for families that have lost children. And they give a piece of their clothing, and then this group of ladies makes bears out of different pieces of clothing, or if a grandparent has passed, or a parent, anybody, they make these. I'm not sure if they call them memory bears, but hanging on to that piece of the specialness that we had with folks that went before us.
Yes, I can remember thinking that same thing about my dad's flannel shirts as we cleared out the closet at the house. I would touch them and I could smell him, and I could, it feels like a hug from heaven.
I still have one of Dad's flannel shirts. And I wear it. I wear it as a little jacket around the house.
Yep.
So, well, today we are going to continue with where I left off last week. This morning we will be talking about two Marys and a Martha. And then we have some other exciting Methodist sheroes that we will share about. But first, Mary, the obedient mother of Jesus. What a touching example in the Bible of total surrender to the will of God. Can you imagine being 12 or 13 years old, and then the angel Gabriel went to her? She was recently engaged. We know this story. I'm not going to dwell on those details. But suddenly her life changed forever. She didn't know what what was going to happen, what was truly expected of her. And despite the potential shame that she would have, that would be heaped on her by the people, she submitted and she gave in to the will of God.
She stepped into faith.
Perfect.
She stood up and she stepped into faith for all of us. She didn't know that at the time, but I think God only gives us enough knowledge in the moment to get us to the next step. Because I think if we had the whole picture, it would scare us to death. But the, the big picture is just sometimes a little too big because it's God's purview, not ours. And so, it was a good that maybe he didn't tell her the whole thing.
So maybe that's what the saying, God only gives you as much as you and he can handle together.
Hmm. Well, trust me in this. Take this first step, and I'll take you to the next one. I'll help you get there.
I'll help you get there. Absolutely. Um, so she was fearful. She was troubled. She was scared. I mean, why wouldn't you be? And she could never have expected to hear that she would carry the Son of God and give birth to the Messiah.
They had been waiting for that for so long, and they kept thinking back in the day, I think their thought was, we're going to have a king in the sense of kings back in that time. But he was a king for the humble person, for the everyday person, for the person in poverty. He was that king. He wasn't in royalty with satins and wealthy and didn't mingle with the people. He was a king of the people, but not in the traditional sense of a king.
Right. And they wanted a king, and that's who they thought Jesus was. And I wonder how God chose her. Um, we know she was a woman of strength, but at the age of 12,
They think that today's girls grow up fast, and maybe they do. But I think back then you had to be an adult woman by between 12 and 14 because your family was going to marry you off. A,
yeah,
they couldn't afford to feed you themselves because they were poor. And so when they married you off, they A, were taking care of you and providing for you. And so she was an obedient daughter, although I think she probably drug her feet a little bit, not knowing what to expect. But um, well, don't we all drag our feet a little bit?
never. Oh, yes. Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And we keep getting on that roundabout and finding reasons to not get off.
Yes, we do. Sometimes it's easier to stay on the roundabout and keep
and not
going
make
around in circles
and not make a choice, not
and
make a
not have to make a choice and not to listen when God calls us and asks us individually to make a commitment, to make a sacrifice for our time, our energy. Uh, he asks us to use our skills, our talents in serving him through serving others. And that's a very important piece that we understand that serving others, we are serving God. I also wonder what kind of sacrifices would I make as the apostles did, as Mary did. And I think we probably don't know that until we are in that minute.
Well, and like these women that we're honoring today, One of them I want to bring attention to is Maud Jensen, was the first woman to be granted full clergy rights in 1956 at the General Conference of the Methodist Church. And 26 other women also received full rights that same year. And there's a picture of her on the United Methodist website. But what courage that must have taken back in another male dominated profession or calling, to step into what you feel is your calling and have to convince every one of your generation that women are worthy, women can do it, women can be effective pastors. And since that time, the church has, the number of women in the clergy has increased.
And women pastors, as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of people are concerned, have a much more loving approach.
We're natural
We are.
nurturers. God made us in that fashion.
Yes, we are.
And not that men can't nurture, because I don't want to imply that.
No, I don't.
Because I think there are many men that are effective in that way. But women, we're just made for it. And I think that adding us to the mix is important. I think Mary Magdalene might have been an effective minister or representative of Christ. And I think that when we look back at the women in the Bible, they were effective leaders of their time. Esther. There were so many that I can't even remember and think of at this time. Sarah, the wife of Abraham. I mean, there's a faithful woman.
90 years.
Mm-hmm. And she stepped away from it for a moment, but then God brought her back,
In his time, not in our time.
Right. And Ruth, talk about submitting yourself to your loved ones and for the greater good of your family, tossing aside the family you grew up with to embrace your dead husband's family, following your mother-in-law into the wilderness, trusting that she knew the way, and being two women alone. That had to have been pretty daunting.
Yes, very scary.
Mm-hmm.
And yet,
on the other end was God's blessing for her faithfulness. It was her reward, but she also she gave as good as she got. She loved without limits. That's what love without limits looks like.
Not that goes back to putting others before self.
Mm-hmm. But I think they set us, their examples in the Bible talk to us today. It talks, the Bible, if you look at it, if some people look at it very literally, and that's, your choice, but it was literal for the time in which it was represented. I think today we have to look beyond the literal to find meaning for it in our own lives, to interpret it for what we need right now, because God's word speaks throughout the ages. It's not limited to just that time and space.
That is very true. There are a couple of quotes from Reverend Shaw. I wake up every morning with a desire to live joyfully. So we can wake up grumpy, or we can let grumpy sleep. Or we can choose to live joyfully. And another one, nothing bigger can come to a human being than to love a great cause more than life itself. And that great cause for her was spreading the gospel.
But for each of us, we're called to do something different because we can't, it loses its effectiveness if we're all on the same boat. I mean, yeah, there are circumstances where we all have to pull on the same oars together, but then there's the times where you have to step out if you are fully convicted about what is your truth and what God has for you to do. And this quote here, the truth is that God accepts every willing person into his kingdom. That is absolutely something that you have. I don't know how you can be a believer and not know that, but that's what we're here to talk about, is it's for everyone.
It doesn't matter what our skills are.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter what we think our skills are.
Yes.
What we think our talents are. Where we shine the brightest. If we truly are following in the footsteps of Jesus, God guides our path.
Well, yes,
And
yesterday's service is an example. Everybody just kind of stepped into it and it turned out beautifully. They did such good work. You did, and Tad did, and Chris and his guest, and Vicky. Without all of them, it would have been much less. As it was full, and it felt not short at all. Except for it felt like it was over too soon. I could have listened to more music. I could have.
I could too.
There are things, I could have sat there a while, but I think leaving us wanting more brings us back next Sunday.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Let's talk a little bit about Mary and Martha before we go back to our other famous women. So again, this is a story that we all know and understand. But the emphasis of this story, just what we have on the screen right now, giving attention to Jesus over our own busyness. Mary sat at the feet of Jesus, listening intently to his words. Martha was busy in the kitchen with her busyness, although she thought what she was doing was in a form worshiping or serving, which she was serving. But
that was the culture, the heart of their culture was that. They didn't, that was what was expected of her in that culture, for someone to make the food, serve the men, wait hand and foot. Whereas Jesus brought a different idea. And it was hard for her to let go of the things she thought were expected of her. How many times do we do the things that are expected of us by our surroundings or our situation versus being led to do something different by God?
And Mary even went. Let me stop. Martha even went so far as to scold Jesus and told him, "You need to tell Mary, get in here and help me." So sometimes we have our priorities wrong. And again, neither one of the things that Mary and Martha did were wrong.
Mm-mm.
Both were important to them at the time. but the fixing the meal will always be there.
That
There's
was a
always another one to fix. We're not always able or have the time, get the opportunity to
or it
just sit with Jesus.
or it's an opportunity to say, "Look how hard I'm working, and someone else isn't working, and aren't I great because I'm doing all this other stuff?" And Jesus was saying, "Well, this other stuff is important too." And that's been the tug of women in families for generations and centuries, where everything you do for the family is important, but everything you do for God is important too. And how do you manage both? Women have been trying to straddle that for generations. And, even back in Jesus' time, if we're to believe the story there, that between Mary and Martha, who was, feeling pretty self-important because I'm managing the kitchen, I'm feeding Jesus, I'm making sure it all happens well, and nobody's helping me. So, let me put on my sackcloth and ashes and feel really good about myself.
And go scold and go scold Jesus.
Yes, I
I,
mean that that took some courage right there, and
ooh,
perhaps a little bit
yes,
misplaced.
a little a little bit misplaced, yes. But at the cross, Martha shared her understanding, and I thought that was interesting. That quote that from the Bible, "Yes, Lord, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world." If we would just recognize that and maybe say it out loud, because sometimes when we say things out loud, even if it's just us that's hearing it, it makes a bigger impact on us. And I think that's why praying out loud is important. It is, I pray a lot of quiet, silent prayers, but I think that praying out loud is a big piece.
Well, and I like this down here on the bottom of the screen. When we give Jesus the attention he deserves, he empowers us to serve others. So the lesson for Martha in that case would be, yes, you're doing all the right things that you've been taught to do, but I'm giving you a new way to think about things. Can you, step up to that? And the growth of Martha from that time until at the foot of the cross. And then he gave the women the important task. He appeared to them after the stone was rolled away. He chose them to go back and tell the men. He didn't tell the men, he told the women.
Right.
And that's a powerful thing.
But,
He could see that they were growing in their faith, and he was doing everything he could to encourage them in that growth. And that's what we are called to do also.
and I kind of to wrap up the story of Mary and Martha. Um, I think it's important that we remember that Jesus gently admonished Martha, what's the word they used, for being worried and upset, not for serving. It wasn't that she wasn't serving. That's
Mhm.
not why he was upset with her. It was because her priorities were in the wrong place right then. And our service is a good thing, but Jesus is more important than those things
And
that we do.
he had a sense of urgency. His time was short, and he had only so much time to be among us, and he was wanting not waste is the wrong word, but misplace the priority. His priority was to get the word out and to help create believers and to follow God, follow in his footsteps, to set the example.
I have another another quote: good works should flow from a Christ-centered life. They do not produce a Christ-centered life. So our good works flow from a Christ-centered life, but our good works do not produce a Christ-centered life. It's
And
kind of like a fine line there.
well, and the other thing about it is there's service that feels like a burden, and there's a service that you can't wait to do. And that's the important difference, I think.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
Anticipation. Because if something feels like a burden, or you're worn out, or you're not focused on truly what you're doing, I mean, you want to do the serve, but you aren't as effective as if you're joyful.
And we can all be joyful. Every day we can be joyful. We put our feet on the floor, and we have the opportunity to get up and serve God. Even if we're staying at home and we're not going anyplace, we still have the opportunity to serve. We can make phone calls. We can write letters. We can do something for ourselves by reading the Bible
And
and
maybe
studying.
the sink full of dishes can sit there for a little bit until
I think
we
so.
do a couple of those things.
I think
Because if
so.
unless we fuel ourselves with that, then we can't pour it out on anyone else.
I think running the vacuum might fall right in there as well. But we can leave that for later.
Yes.
Oh, we can leave that for later.
We can be Martha or we can be Mary, but we can actually be a little of both because it takes both.
I think we have to be both.
Hmm.
We just have to find that balance, um, and we have to know where our strengths are.
And Martha, while she stumbled a little bit in the beginning, he showed her the way and he led her gently down a new path. And she went. And the things that she witnessed and the things that she was responsible for in the end were they traveled down the centuries in powerful ways.
And there are a lot of powerful women in the Bible. There are a lot of powerful women that surround us, and I think the powerful women that I know have both the characteristics of Mary and Martha.
The saints that went before us.
The saints that went before us.
Even though they were maybe limited in their role due to the circumstances and the times they were living in, they found a way.
I think about my ancestors, especially in researching some of this information and reading the Bible in the different areas about these women. I think about my grandmothers, and I was way past blessed to have had them for so many years. Um, and growing up, I didn't think anything about, oh, this was important, how grandma did this or grandma did that. But when I stop and think about my dad's mother, Grandma Sadie, um, she had 7 children, and of course they lived on a farm and raised most of the food, canned it, prepared the meals, and I don't think I know a more devoted Christian woman. Well, perhaps 2 of her daughters. Yes, perhaps 2 of her daughters. Um, But what an example my grandmothers were to me. The struggles, the perseverance. My mom's mom lived up on top of a hill in western Kansas, in a stone house, and the dust storms that came through. And I remember one of the things that she told me was, we hang wet sheets up at the windows so that we can breathe, because the dust filtered in around the glass panes. And all that time, she was strong in her faith that everything was going to be okay for her and her family.
Yeah, I have some powerful women in my family too, and I look back, but yet at the time you don't see them as powerful women. You see them as women, the stories you hear and the endurance, you see the endurance, the things that they endured, but they did more than endure, they lived. And so without their faith, I don't think that would have been possible.
I'm sure it would not have been. So, for all those of you that are listening to us right now, keep the faith, keep your faith strong. Study the Bible, read the Bible, pray, listen for God's voice. And yes, the message on the screen. Join us to celebrate Palm Sunday and worship with us during the Holy Week on Thursday at the First Presbyterian Church, and Friday at First Christian Church at 7 o'clock. We have Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday service leading up to Palm Sunday.
Take the path that Jesus took with us as we journey his last week together and celebrate his life, mourn his crucifixion, and become ever joyful in the eternal life that his resurrection brought to us.
Amen to that. And I hope we see lots of you at First Presbyterian and First Christian Thursday and Friday this week. So we will say goodbye for today. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.
I think it's not this week, but next week.
Next week. Sorry about that. Don't go to the First Presbyterian Church and First Christian Church this week. Well, I guess no, it would be the wrong day. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean that to be confusing. I'm glad I said later this week. So no, not this week, next week.
Goodbye, everybody.